Maya Rodriguez pressed her small hands against the cool glass of the school bus window, watching the familiar streets of Pine Ridge blur past. At 8 years old, she had learned to keep certain truths to herself. The truth about why her mother sometimes disappeared for months at a time. The truth about the strange scars that traced patterns across her mom's arms and shoulders. The truth about the locked room in their basement that smelled like gun oil and contained equipment Maya wasn't allowed to touch. But today was different. Today was career day at Willowbrook Elementary, and Maya had made a decision that would change everything. The bus wheezed to a stop outside the small brick building that housed grades kindergarten through 8th. Pine Ridge wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention. Nestled in the mountains of Colorado, it was the sort of town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep, and where Maya's family had always been something of a mystery. "Have a good day, sweetheart," called Mrs. Patterson, the bus driver who had known Maya since she started school. Maya waved and stepped down onto the cracked pavement, her backpack heavy with the presentation she had prepared. Inside Mrs. Chin's third-grade classroom, 23 children sat in a circle on the colorful alphabet carpet. Career Day was always exciting. Last year, Tommy's dad had brought his fire truck, and Sarah's mom had shown them how to decorate cakes. This year, the presentations had been equally impressive. Jake's father was a park ranger who brought photos of bears and mountain lions. Emma's grandmother was a retired teacher who had taught in 7 different countries. Now was Maya's turn. She stood slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Around the circle, her classmates looked at her with mild curiosity. Maya was known as the quiet girl, the one who never caused trouble, who always finished her homework, who sometimes seemed older than her 8 years. "My mom," Maya began, her voice barely above a whisper, "is a Navy SEAL." The reaction was immediate. Several children giggled. Bobby Peterson, who sat directly across from her, rolled his eyes dramatically. Even Mrs. Chen looked surprised, raising her eyebrows as she prepared to gently correct what she assumed was a childhood misunderstanding. "Maya," Mrs. Chen said kindly, "SEALs are very brave military people, but they're usually men. Are you sure you don't mean your mom works with the Navy in some other way?" Maya's cheeks burned red, but she lifted her chin with a determination that reminded anyone paying attention of her mother. "She is a SEAL. She's Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez, and she's part of SEAL Team 7. The giggles turned into outright laughter. Bobby Peterson was practically falling over. "Girls can't be SEALs," he announced loudly. "My uncle was in the Marines, and he told me SEALs are the toughest guys in the whole military. Girls aren't strong enough." "Yeah," chimed in Jessica Walsh, who always agreed with Bobby. "And besides, if your mom was really a SEAL, wouldn't she be famous or something? We would know about it." Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Her mother had taught her never to cry when people doubted her. "She can't talk about most of what she does," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "It's classified. That means secret." More laughter rippled through the circle. Even some of the usually kind children were smirking now. The idea of quiet Maya's mysterious mother being one of the military's elite warriors seemed absurd to their young minds. Mrs. Chun clapped her hand softly. "Okay, children, let's be respectful. Maya, why don't you tell us more about what your mom does when she's home?" But the damage was done. Maya could see it in their faces. They thought she was lying, or at best, deeply confused about her mother's job. She sat back down on the carpet, her presentation forgotten, and listened as the next child stood up to talk about their parents' job as a veterinarian. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of whispered comments and sideways glances. At lunch, Maya sat alone, picking at her sandwich while conversations buzzed around her. She caught fragments. "Thinks her mom is like a superhero or something. My dad says girls in the military just do paperwork. Why would she make up something so stupid?" When the final bell rang, Maya was the first one on the bus. She slumped into her usual seat near the front and stared out the window as Pine Ridge's main street rolled past. The town really was small, just one traffic light, a handful of shops, a diner that served as the unofficial community center, and rows of modest houses tucked between tall pine trees. Her house was at the end of Maple Street, a 2-story home that looked exactly like every other house in the neighborhood. Nothing about it suggested that one of the nation's most elite warriors lived there. No flags, no military decorations visible from the street, nothing to set it apart. Maya climbed the front steps and used her key to let herself in. The house was quiet, as it had been for the past 6 weeks. Her mother was deployed somewhere. Maya never knew where exactly, and wouldn't be back for at least another month. In the meantime, Maya stayed with Mrs. Garcia next door after school until her father got home from his job at the hardware store. But today, Maya needed to be alone for a few minutes. She needed to remind herself that what she had told her classmates was true. She dropped her backpack by the front door and walked through the living room, past family photos that showed her parents' wedding, her first steps, family vacations to the beach. In most of the photos, her mother looked like any other mom, smiling, laughing, holding Maya close. But there were subtle differences if you knew how to look. The way Elena Rodriguez held herself, perfectly straight and alert. The way her eyes seemed to scan the background of every photo. The faint tan lines that spoke of long hours in the sun, wearing tactical gear. Maya stopped in front of the mantelpiece, where a single photo sat in a place of honor. It showed her mother in dress blues, her chest decorated with ribbons, and medals that Maya was only beginning to understand. Next to the Navy photo was Elena's college graduation picture. She had been the first person in her family to graduate from college, earning a degree in international relations before surprising everyone by joining the military. The basement door was locked as always, but Maya knew what was down there. She had glimpsed it once when her mother was packing for deployment and had forgotten to close the door all the way. Tactical gear, weapons, equipment whose purpose Maya could only guess at. It looked like something from a movie, except it was real, and it belonged to her mom. Maya heard Mrs. Garcia's voice calling from next door. It was time for her afternoon snack. She grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, but paused for one last look at the photo of her mother in uniform. "They don't believe me," she whispered to the empty house. "But you really are a SEAL, aren't you, Mom?" The photo, of course, didn't answer. But Maya thought she could see something in her mother's eyes, the same determination that Maya had felt when she stood up in front of her class. Elena Rodriguez had spent her entire career proving that she belonged in a world that didn't expect women to succeed. And now, without meaning to, she had passed that challenge on to her daughter. Maya locked the door behind her and walked across the lawn to Mrs. Garcia's house. Tomorrow, she would face her classmates again. Tomorrow, she would have to endure more whispers and stares. But tonight, she would call her father at work and ask him to tell her more stories about her mother's training, about the day Elena graduated from BUD/S, about the night she first told him what she really did for a living. Because Maya was beginning to understand that some truths were worth defending, especially when nobody wanted to believe them. At Mrs. Garcia's kitchen table, Maya spread out her homework and tried to focus on math problems. But her mind kept drifting to her mother, somewhere in the world, doing things that 8-year-old girls weren't supposed to understand. Elena Rodriguez was out there proving herself every single day, showing that strength came in many forms, that courage wasn't about size or gender, but about heart and determination. Maya picked up her pencil and got to work on her math homework. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was Elena Rodriguez's daughter. She could handle whatever came next. The afternoon sun streamed through Mrs. Garcia's windows, casting long shadows across the homework spread before Maya. Outside, Pine Ridge went about its quiet business, unaware that one of its most ordinary-looking houses held extraordinary secrets. But Maya knew, and that knowledge would have to be enough for now. She finished her math problems and moved on to reading, but the words on the page seemed less important than the truth burning in her chest. Her mother was a Navy SEAL. It didn't matter who believed it and who didn't. It was real, it was true, and someday, Maya promised herself, everyone would know it. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Mrs. Garcia answered in the kitchen, speaking in rapid Spanish that Maya couldn't follow. But something in the older woman's tone made Maya look up from her book. Mrs. Garcia sounded worried, even frightened. Maya couldn't know it yet, but that phone call was about to change everything. In less than 24 hours, her mother's classified world would collide with Pine Ridge in a way that no one could have predicted. The truth Maya had been trying to defend would suddenly be impossible to ignore. But for now, she was just a third grader doing homework at her neighbor's table, dreaming of a mother who lived in shadows and wondering how long she could keep believing in heroes that nobody else could see. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering over the Rocky Mountains. Maya woke to the sound of her father moving around in the kitchen downstairs, the familiar routine of coffee brewing and toast popping up from the toaster. David Rodriguez was a quiet man who had learned to handle both the ordinary demands of single parenting and the extraordinary stress of being married to someone whose job he couldn't discuss with anyone. "Morning, sweetheart," he called as Maya padded downstairs in her pajamas and fuzzy slippers. David was already dressed for work in his usual flannel shirt and jeans, his hardware store name tag pinned to his chest pocket. At 42, he had the weathered hands of someone who worked with tools all day, but his eyes held the same gentle patience that had attracted Elena Rodriguez 15 years earlier. "Dad," Maya said, settling into her chair at the kitchen table, "tell me again about when Mom became a SEAL." David paused in buttering his toast, glancing at his daughter with concern. Maya had been asking more questions about her mother's career lately, and he suspected something was bothering her. I can't tell you details about her training, Maya. That's not my story to share. But you can tell me why she wanted to do it, right?" David sat down across from Maya and studied her serious expression. At 8 years old, she looked remarkably like her mother. The same dark eyes that seemed to see everything, the same stubborn set to her jaw when she was determined about something. "Your mom always wanted to serve her country," he said carefully. "Even when she was little, she talked about joining the military. Her grandfather fought in World War II, and she grew up hearing his stories." "But why the SEALs specifically?" David smiled, remembering his wife's explanation from years earlier. She said she didn't want to be limited by what other people thought she could or couldn't do. She wanted to prove that courage and skill matter more than anything else. Maya nodded solemnly, filing this information away with all the other pieces of her mother's story. "The kids at school don't believe me when I tell them what Mom does." There it was, the real reason for Maya's questions. David felt his heart squeeze with sympathy for his daughter. He and Elena had discussed this possibility many times, knowing that Maya would eventually face skepticism about her mother's career. The number of women in the SEALs was so small that most people assumed it was impossible. "What happened yesterday?" David asked gently. Maya told him about career day, about the laughter and the dismissive comments from her classmates. As she spoke, David could see the hurt in her eyes, but also something else, a fierce pride that reminded him powerfully of Elena. David said when Maya finished, "Your mom faced the same kind of doubts when she first tried to become a SEAL. A lot of people told her she wasn't strong enough, or fast enough, or tough enough. But she proved them wrong, one challenge at a time. How? By showing up every day and doing the work. By never giving up, even when things got really hard. Your mom didn't become a SEAL by talking about it. She became a SEAL by earning it." Maya considered this as she ate her cereal. Outside, the storm clouds were growing darker, and the first fat raindrops began hitting the kitchen window. The weather forecast had been calling for severe thunderstorms all week, but this looked like it might be worse than expected. David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and frowned. "Looks like they're expecting some serious weather today. Mrs. Garcia might need to pick you up from school if it gets bad." Maya nodded, still thinking about what her father had said. As she got ready for school, choosing her clothes carefully and braiding her dark hair the way her mother had taught her, she made a decision. She wasn't going to try to convince her classmates anymore. Like her mother, she would prove herself through actions, not words. The school day started normally enough. Maya took her seat in Mrs. Chen's classroom and focused on her lessons, ignoring the occasional whispered comment about yesterday's career day presentation. During morning math, she helped Bobby Peterson with a fraction problem he was struggling with, meeting his surprise with quiet competence. At recess, while the other children played on the playground equipment, Maya sat on a bench reading a book about military history that she had checked out from the school library. She was deep in a chapter about World War II when Jessica Walsh approached her. "Maya, Jessica said, sitting down on the bench uninvited. My dad asked his friend who was in the Navy about women SEALs last night. Maya looked up from her book, her expression carefully neutral. What did he say? He said there are some women in the SEALs now, but not very many. Like, maybe 20 or 30 in the whole country. Jessica's voice had lost its mocking tone from the day before. He said if your mom really is one, that's pretty incredible. Before Maya could respond, the playground was suddenly filled with the wailing of emergency sirens. Not the weekly test they were all used to, but the real thing, long, urgent blasts that sent children scrambling toward their teachers. Mrs. Chun appeared at the classroom door, her face pale with concern. Everyone inside, quickly, she called. We need to get to the safe area right now. Maya had never heard her teacher sound frightened before. She followed the stream of children into the school building, where teachers were herding everyone toward the interior hallways away from windows. The principal's voice crackled over the intercom system. This is not a drill. We are under severe weather warning. All students and staff should move to designated safe areas immediately. In the hallway, Maya crouched against the wall with her classmates, listening to the storm intensify outside. Rain hammered against the building, and the wind howled through the mountains with a sound she had never heard before. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting strange shadows down the hallway. Some of the younger children started crying, and teachers moved among them with flashlights and reassuring words. But Maya could see the worry in the adults' faces. This was more than just a normal thunderstorm. It's okay, Mrs. Chun said, trying to keep her voice calm. Sometimes we get big storms in the mountains. The power will come back on soon. But the power didn't come back on. And after 30 minutes crouched in the hallway, listening to what sounded like a freight train roaring through the mountains above them, Maya began to understand that this was something much more serious than a regular storm. Principal Martinez's voice came over the battery-powered intercom. Teachers, please gather in the main office for an emergency briefing. Students should remain in safe areas with assistant teachers and volunteers. Maya watched Mrs. Chin disappear down the hallway with the other teachers, leaving them with Mrs. Patterson, the bus driver, and 2 parent volunteers who had been visiting for a reading program. The adults huddled together, speaking in low, worried voices that the children couldn't quite hear. What do you think is happening? Whispered Tommy, the boy whose father was a park ranger. Maybe a tornado, suggested Sarah. My grandma in Kansas told me they sound like trains. Maya listened to the conversation swirling around her, but her attention was focused on something else. Through the emergency lighting and the sounds of frightened children, she could hear voices coming from the main office. Adult voices, urgent and concerned, talking about roads washed out and communications down and emergency response teams unable to reach Pine Ridge. They were cut off. Whatever was happening outside, the little mountain town was on its own. Mrs. Chin returned after what felt like hours, her face grim. She gathered the third graders around her and spoke in a kind of careful, calm voice that adults used when they were trying not to panic children. There's been a very bad storm in the mountains, she explained. Some roads are blocked, and the power is out in town. We're going to stay here at school until it's safe to go home. When will that be? Asked Bobby Peterson, his earlier bravado completely gone. We're not sure yet, Mrs. Chin admitted. But you're all safe here, and we have food and water. We're going to turn this into an adventure. Okay. Maya could see through the careful words to the truth underneath. They weren't just waiting for the storm to pass. They were stranded. Pine Ridge was a small town with limited emergency services even under normal circumstances, and these were clearly not normal circumstances. As the afternoon wore on, more information filtered down from the adults. The storm had triggered flash floods and mudslides throughout the region. The main highway was completely blocked, and several smaller roads had been washed out entirely. Cell phone towers were down, and landline communications were sporadic at best. Maya thought about her father at the hardware store, probably dealing with his own emergency as people sought supplies for storm damage. She thought about Mrs. Garcia, alone in her house next door, and she thought about her mother, somewhere in the world, not knowing that her family and her daughter's school were in trouble. That evening, As the children settled onto cots that had been brought from the school's emergency supplies, Maya stared up at the ceiling of the gymnasium and wondered how long they would be trapped. Outside, the storm had passed, but the damage was done. Pine Ridge was isolated, cut off from the outside world, and help was at least days away. Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember every story her mother had ever told her about overcoming impossible situations, about finding strength when everything seemed hopeless, about the training that prepared SEALs for any crisis. She had no way of knowing that less than 100 miles away, a crisis response team was already mobilizing, or that her mother's unit, returning from a classified mission, had been diverted to assist with disaster relief in the Colorado mountains, or that by tomorrow morning, the truth Maya had been defending would finally be impossible to deny. For now, she was just a third grader on a cot in a school gym, listening to the wind and praying that morning would bring help. But Maya Rodriguez was also the daughter of a Navy SEAL, and she carried that strength in her blood, whether anyone believed it or not. Dawn broke gray and cold over Pine Ridge, revealing a landscape that looked like a war zone. Maya woke on her cot in the school gymnasium to the sound of Principal Martinez talking quietly with several teachers near the emergency radio. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with rushing water and her mother's voice calling her name. Around her, other children were beginning to stir. Some of the younger ones had cried themselves to sleep, worried about their families and confused by spending the night at school. The older students tried to act brave, but Maya could see the fear in their eyes as they looked toward the adults for reassurance that everything would be okay. Mrs. Chun appeared beside Maya's cot with a gentle smile that didn't quite hide her own worry. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" "Okay," Maya lied, sitting up and folding her blanket neatly the way her mother had taught her. "Are our parents all right?" "We hope so," Mrs. Chun said carefully. "The emergency radio is working sometimes, and we've been able to reach a few families. Your father is safe at the hardware store. They're using it as a shelter for people whose homes were damaged." Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been trying not to think about her father trapped somewhere, possibly hurt. "What about Mrs. Garcia?" "She's okay too. She's with your father, actually. When her basement flooded, he helped her get to safety." The relief was so strong that Maya felt dizzy for a moment. Both of the most important people in her immediate world were safe. But as she looked around the gymnasium at the worried faces of her classmates and teachers, she realized that safety was relative. They were still cut off from the outside world, still dependent on whatever emergency supplies the school had been able to gather. Principal Martinez clapped his hands for attention. "Good morning, everyone. I know this is scary and different, but I want you all to know that help is coming. The emergency radio is telling us that rescue teams are working to clear the roads and restore communication." "When will they get here?" asked Bobby Peterson's younger sister, who was only in first grade. "We don't know exactly," the principal admitted. "But in the meantime, we're going to take care of each other. We have food and water, and we're going to make this as comfortable as possible." Maya listened to the conversation, but her attention was drawn to something else, a sound she recognized but couldn't quite place. It was distant, almost lost in the wind, but there was a rhythmic quality to it that made her think of her mother. The sound grew louder, and Maya realized what it was: helicopters. Multiple helicopters flying low and fast through the mountains. Around her, other people began to notice too. Conversations stopped as everyone strained to listen. Principal Martinez hurried to the window, pressing his face against the glass and peering up at the sky. "I can see them," he called. "There are 3 helicopters heading this way." The gymnasium erupted in excited chatter. Children pressed against the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of their potential rescuers. Teachers gathered around the emergency radio, hoping for some communication from the incoming aircraft. Maya stood quietly near her cot, listening to the sound of the helicopters grow closer. There was something about the way they moved, the precise formation they maintained, that reminded her of stories her mother had told about military operations. These weren't just rescue helicopters. These were military aircraft, flying with the kind of precision that spoke of elite training. The helicopters circled the school once, then twice before one of them began to descend toward the football field behind the building. Maya could see through the windows as it touched down, its rotors still spinning, and figures in military gear began jumping out. "Everyone stay calm," Principal Martinez announced, though he sounded more excited than calm himself. "It looks like the military has sent a rescue team. We're going to be okay." Maya felt her heart begin to race, but not from fear or excitement. There was something familiar about the way the soldiers moved, something about their equipment and their formation that made her think of late-night phone calls and classified conversations she wasn't supposed to overhear. The gymnasium doors opened, and 3 figures in full military gear entered. They moved with the fluid confidence of people who were used to hostile environments, their eyes automatically scanning the room for threats and escape routes. The lead figure was smaller than the other 2, compact and efficient in every movement. Maya knew before the figure removed her helmet. Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez stood in the doorway of the gymnasium, water dripping from her tactical gear, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her eyes scanning the crowd of children and teachers until they found what they were looking for. "Maya," she said, and her voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent room. Maya didn't remember running. One moment she was standing by her cot, and the next she was in her mother's arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, mixed with the unfamiliar smells of tactical gear and helicopter fuel. "Mom," Maya whispered, her voice muffled against Elena's shoulder. "You came." "Of course I came," Elena murmured back, her own voice thick with emotion. "As soon as we heard about the situation, as soon as we were close enough to help, there was never any question." Maya pulled back to look at her mother's face, seeing the concern and relief there, but also something else, the professional competence of someone who was used to crisis situations. Elena Rodriguez had switched seamlessly from worried mother to operational commander, and Maya could see both sides of her personality working in perfect harmony. Around them, the gymnasium had gone completely silent. Children and teachers stared in amazement at the reunion taking place before their eyes. Maya could see Bobby Peterson's face, his mouth hanging open in shock. Jessica Walsh looked like she was trying to solve a complicated puzzle. Even Mrs. Chun appeared stunned. Elena became aware of their audience and gently set Maya back on her feet. She turned to address the room, and Maya watched her mother transform into the military leader she had always known she was but had never seen in action. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, United States Navy," Elena announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "I'm here with a joint military task force that's been deployed for disaster relief and emergency rescue operations. We're going to get everyone safely evacuated and reunited with their families." Principal Martinez stepped forward, looking both relieved and slightly overwhelmed. "Commander Rodriguez, we have 63 children and 12 staff members. Some of the children have medical conditions that require attention, and we're running low on food and clean water." Elena nodded briskly, already mentally organizing the evacuation. "My team has medical personnel and supplies. We'll assess everyone who needs immediate attention, then begin transport to the emergency shelter we've established in Grand Junction. The helicopters can take about 20 people per trip, so we'll have everyone out of here within the next few hours." She turned back to Maya, her expression softening just slightly. "I need you to be brave for a little while longer, okay? I have to help coordinate the evacuation, but then we'll go home together." Maya nodded, understanding instinctively that her mother was asking her to share her attention with all the other people who needed help. It was a lesson in leadership that she would remember for the rest of her life. Sometimes caring for one person meant caring for everyone. But as Elena turned to begin organizing the evacuation, Maya became aware of the whispered conversations starting around the gymnasium. Her classmates were beginning to process what they had just witnessed, and the implications were slowly sinking in. "That's really her mom," she heard Tommy whisper to Sarah. "Like, actually her mom. In military gear. With helicopters." She said she was a lieutenant commander, Bobby Peterson said, his voice hushed with something that might have been awe. "My uncle always said commanders were like, really important." Jessica Walsh approached Maya cautiously, her earlier skepticism completely gone. "Maya," she said quietly, "your mom is actually a Navy SEAL." It wasn't a question. Maya looked at her classmate and nodded simply. "Yes, she is. And she came to rescue us." "Yes." Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you yesterday. I'm sorry we all laughed." Maya considered this apology, thinking about what her mother would want her to say. "It's okay," she said finally. "I understand why it was hard to believe." Around them, Elena and her team were efficiently organizing the evacuation. Children with medical needs were identified and prepared for the first helicopter trip. Teachers gathered essential records and supplies. The operation moved with the kind of smooth precision that spoke of extensive training and experience. Maya watched her mother work, seeing her interact with the other military personnel with easy authority, seeing the way she assessed problems and developed solutions on the fly. This was the woman Maya had been trying to describe to her classmates, the hero she had known existed but had never been able to prove. Elena caught Maya's eye across the gymnasium and smiled, not the professional smile she used with the other civilians, but the warm, loving smile that belonged only to her daughter. In that moment, Maya understood something important about courage. It wasn't about proving yourself to people who doubted you. It was about knowing who you were and what you were capable of, even when nobody else could see it. The first helicopter lifted off with 20 passengers, including 3 children who needed medical attention and their parents who had been located at other emergency shelters. Maya watched it disappear over the mountains, carrying her classmates towards safety and reunion with their families. Elena approached Maya's group as they prepared for the second helicopter. "Ready to go home?" she asked her daughter. Maya looked around the gymnasium one last time, at the place where she had spent a frightening night wondering if help would ever come. Her mother had arrived exactly when she was needed most, with exactly the skills necessary to solve an impossible problem. It was the kind of heroic rescue that Maya had always known her mother was capable of, even when everyone else thought she was just making up stories. "I'm ready," Maya said, taking her mother's hand. As they walked toward the helicopter together, Maya could hear her classmates talking behind them, their voices filled with amazement and new understanding. Tomorrow, when they were all safely home, and this adventure became a story they would tell for years to come, no one would ever doubt Maya Rodriguez again when she talked about her mother. But Maya had learned something more important than proving herself to her classmates. She had learned that the truth was powerful enough to survive any amount of disbelief, and that heroes came in many forms, including mothers who dropped everything to rescue a school full of children in a mountain storm. The helicopter ride to Grand Junction was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Strapped into a military transport seat between her mother and Bobby Peterson, she watched the Colorado mountains pass beneath them through the aircraft's small windows. The storm damage was visible everywhere. Roads washed out, trees down, entire sections of mountainside scarred by mudslides. Elena sat with her hand resting protectively on Maya's shoulder, but her attention was divided between her daughter and the radio communications crackling through her headset. Even during what should have been a moment of reunion and relief, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez was still coordinating rescue operations throughout the region. "Copy that, base," Elena spoke in her microphone, her voice professional and calm. "School evacuation complete. 63 children and 12 staff members transported safely to Grand Junction. No casualties, minimal medical issues. Team 7 proceeding to secondary objectives." Maya listened to her mother's report with fascination. This was the voice she sometimes heard late at night when Elena was on encrypted phone calls, the tone she used when lies depended on precision and clear communication. It was strange to hear it directed at strangers instead of family, but it helped Maya understand the weight of responsibility her mother carried. Bobby Peterson leaned over to Maya, having to shout slightly to be heard over the helicopter noise. "Your mom talks like she's in charge of everything." Maya looked at her mother, who was now discussing evacuation priorities for an isolated nursing home with someone on the radio. She kind of is, Maya shouted back. The helicopter touched down at the emergency shelter that had been established at a middle school in Grand Junction. As they disembarked, Maya could see that the operation was massive. Dozens of military vehicles, medical tents, communication arrays, and hundreds of people who had been displaced by the storm. It looked like something from a disaster movie, except it was real and her mother was helping to run it. Maya, Elena said, unbuckling her daughter from the transport seat, I need you to stay with the other children from your school while I check in with the command center. Mrs. Chun and the other teachers will make sure you're all taken care of until we can reunite everyone with their families. Maya nodded, understanding that her mother still had work to do. Around them, her classmates were being led toward a large tent where cots and food had been prepared. But Maya noticed that several of them kept looking back at Elena, their expressions filled with new respect and curiosity. As Elena prepared to leave for her briefing, Principal Martinez approached her. Commander Rodriguez, he said formally, I wanted to thank you personally for the rescue operation. Your team's response was incredible. Elena smiled, and Maya could see her mother's natural warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. We were in the right place at the right time, Mr. Martinez. I'm just glad we could help. If you don't mind me asking, the principal continued, how did you know about the situation at our school so quickly? We hadn't been able to establish reliable communications with the outside world. Elena's expression became more serious. We were returning from a training exercise when the storm hit. Command diverted us to assist with disaster relief, and we had aerial reconnaissance that showed the school was being used as a shelter. When I realized it was Maya's school, she paused, glancing at her daughter. Let's just say the mission became very personal very quickly. Maya felt a rush of pride as she watched the principal's face change. Mr. Martinez was beginning to understand that Elena Rodriguez wasn't just any military officer. She was someone important enough to divert an entire operation when her family was in danger. Elena kissed Maya goodbye and headed toward the command center, where Maya could see other uniformed officers waiting for her. She moved with the same confident stride Maya had always admired, but now Maya understood that this confidence came from years of training and experience in situations most people could barely imagine. In the children's tent, Mrs. Chun helped Maya and her classmates get settled with food and clean clothes that had been donated by local families. The atmosphere was strange, relief mixed with exhaustion, excitement about their helicopter rescue mixed with worry about their families and homes. Maya, Mrs. Chun said quietly, sitting down beside her student with a cup of hot chocolate, I owe you an apology. Yesterday, when you told us about your mother's job, I should have believed you. Maya looked at her teacher, seeing genuine regret in her face. You couldn't have known, she said simply. Mom's job is supposed to be secret. But you knew. You've always known, haven't you? Maya nodded. She tries to protect me from the scary parts, but I knew she was special. I just couldn't prove it to anyone else. Mrs. Chan was quiet for a moment, then asked, what was it like, knowing something so important that nobody believed? Maya considered the question carefully. Lonely sometimes, but Mom always told me that the truth doesn't change just because other people can't see it. She said that believing in yourself is more important than getting other people to believe in you. Before Mrs. Chen could respond, Bobby Peterson appeared beside Maya's cot. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his hands and avoiding eye contact. Maya, he said finally, I wanted to say I'm sorry about yesterday, about laughing and saying girls couldn't be SEALs. Maya looked at Bobby, remembering how cruel his laughter had felt in the classroom just 24 hours earlier. But she also remembered something her mother had once told her about forgiveness being a sign of strength, not weakness. It's okay, Bobby, she said. You didn't know any better. But I should have, Bobby insisted. My uncle always talks about how tough SEALs are, and when I saw your mom today, she was scarier than any soldier I've ever seen in movies. Like in a good way. Like she could handle anything. Maya smiled at this description. She can handle anything. That's what makes her a good SEAL. Word about Maya's mother had begun to spread throughout the temporary shelter. Children and adults who had been rescued from other locations kept glancing toward their group, whispering about the Navy SEAL who had led the school evacuation. Maya found herself in the strange position of being famous by association, and she wasn't entirely sure how she felt about it. Jessica Walsh approached the group, her expression thoughtful. "Maya," she said, "can I ask you something? What's it like having a mom who does such dangerous things?" Maya had been asked this question before by adults who knew about Elena's career, but never by another child. She thought about how to answer honestly without betraying the classified nature of her mother's work. "It's scary sometimes," she admitted. "When she's deployed, I don't always know where she is or when she'll come home. But it's also amazing because I know she's out there helping people and protecting our country." "Don't you worry about her getting hurt?" Maya nodded. "All the time. But Mom always says that being afraid doesn't mean you don't do important things. It just means you do them carefully." As the afternoon wore on, families began arriving at the shelter to reunite with their children. Maya watched tearful reunions as parents who had been separated from their kids during the storm finally found them safe. She was happy for her classmates, but part of her wondered when her own father would arrive. Elena returned to the children's tent just as the sun was beginning to set. She looked tired, but satisfied, and Maya could tell from her expression that the day's operations had been successful. She was followed by a man in civilian clothes whom Maya recognized immediately. "Dad!" Maya called, jumping up from her cot and running toward David Rodriguez. Her father caught her in a bear hug that lifted her off the ground. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so worried about you. When the roads washed out and we couldn't get to the school. Dad, did you see Mom rescue us?" Maya asked excitedly. "She came in a helicopter with her whole team." David looked over Maya's head at Elena, his expression full of love and pride. "I heard all about it on the emergency radio. They kept talking about the Navy SEAL team that evacuated the school. I should have known it was your mother." Elena joined their family reunion, and for a moment they stood together in the middle of the chaotic shelter, just holding each other. Maya felt completely safe for the first time since the storm had started, surrounded by both of her parents and knowing that they were all okay. "So," David said to Elena with a tired smile, "another successful mission." Elena laughed, the sound warm and genuine after hours of military professionalism. "Something like that. Although I have to say, this was the most personal mission I've ever been on." As they prepared to leave the shelter and head home to Pine Ridge, where emergency crews had restored basic services, Maya became aware that her classmates were watching their family with something approaching awe. She realized that everything had changed in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been the girl who told impossible stories about her mother. Today, she was the girl whose mother was a real-life hero. Bobby Peterson approached their family group one last time. "Commander Rodriguez," he said formally, clearly trying to use the right title. "Thank you for saving us." Elena smiled and extended her hand to Bobby for a serious handshake. "You're very welcome, son. And thank you for looking out for Maya at school. That means a lot to me." Bobby shook Elena's hand with the kind of reverence usually reserved for meeting celebrities. "Ma'am, is it really true that you graduated from SEAL training? Like the whole thing with the cold water and carrying logs and everything?" Elena's smile grew wider. "Every bit of it. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most rewarding. And you're really on a SEAL team that goes on secret missions?" Elena glanced at Maya, then back at Bobby. "I can't talk about most of what I do, but yes, I serve on an operational SEAL team. Maya knows that some parts of my job have to stay secret. Don't you, sweetheart?" Maya nodded solemnly. "But the important part isn't secret," she said. "The important part is that she helps people." As they walked toward the parking area where David's truck was waiting, Maya reflected on the most extraordinary 24 hours of her life. Yesterday, she had been a little girl trying to convince her classmates that her mother was a hero. Today, that same mother had literally dropped from the sky to rescue them all. The truth hadn't changed. Elena Rodriguez had been a Navy SEAL before the storm, and she would continue being one after they all went home. But now that truth was no longer Maya's secret to carry alone. Now it belonged to everyone who had witnessed Elena in action, everyone who had seen what a real SEAL looked like when people needed saving. Maya climbed in the back seat of her father's truck, exhausted but happy. Tomorrow, she would go back to Willowbrook Elementary, where her teacher and classmates would see her in a completely different light. She would no longer be the girl with the unbelievable story. She would be the girl whose unbelievable story had turned out to be absolutely true. 3 weeks had passed since the storm, and Maya's life had settled into a new kind of normal. The physical damage to Pine Ridge was slowly being repaired. Roads reopened, power lines restored, and flooded homes cleaned and rebuilt. But some changes were permanent, and Maya was still adjusting to being the most famous third grader in town. Walking into Willowbrook Elementary that Monday morning, Maya noticed how different everything felt. The same building, the same classroom, the same faces, but the way people looked at her had completely changed. Teachers smiled at her with new warmth. Older students nodded respectfully when they passed her in the hallways, and her own classmates treated her with something between friendship and fascination. "Good morning, Maya," Mrs. Chen said as Maya took her seat. There was a special kindness in her teacher's voice that hadn't been there before the storm, a recognition that Maya carried knowledge and experiences beyond her 8 years. The morning started with current events, a weekly tradition where students shared news stories they had found interesting. Maya usually participated quietly, if at all, but today Tommy raised his hand with obvious excitement. "I brought an article about the storm rescue," he announced, holding up a newspaper clipping. "It's from the Denver Post, and it talks about the military team that saved our school. It mentions Maya's mom by name." Maya felt her cheeks grow warm as all eyes turned toward her. She had seen the article, several articles, actually, but hearing about her family in the newspaper still felt surreal. Tommy read aloud. "Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez, a member of an elite Navy SEAL unit, led the evacuation of Willowbrook Elementary School in Pine Ridge, Colorado, after the facility was cut off by severe flooding. The operation successfully transported 63 children and 12 staff members to safety with no casualties." "Maya," Mrs. Chun said gently, "would you like to share anything about that experience?" Maya considered the question carefully. Over the past 3 weeks, she had been asked to tell the story many times, to relatives, to neighbors, to reporters who had called the house. Each time, she tried to balance honesty about what had happened with respect for the classified nature of her mother's work. "It was scary at first," Maya said, addressing her classmates. "Being stuck at school and not knowing when we'd get home. But when Mom arrived with her team, I wasn't scared anymore. She made everything feel safe again." Bobby Peterson raised his hand. "Maya, can you tell us more about what SEAL training is like? My uncle keeps asking me to ask you." Maya smiled at Bobby's question. Over the past few weeks, he had become one of her closest friends, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. "Mom can't talk about a lot of her training because it's classified," Maya explained. "But she says it's designed to prepare people for any situation. That's why she knew exactly what to do when we needed help." Sarah, who sat across from Maya, leaned forward with interest. "My dad says your mom is famous now. He saw her picture in a magazine at the grocery store." This was new information to Maya, and she made a mental note to ask her mother about it later. Elena had been giving interviews to military publications and disaster preparedness organizations, sharing lessons learned from the rescue operation. Maya was proud of the attention her mother was receiving, but she also knew that Elena was uncomfortable with public recognition for doing what she considered to be her job. "She doesn't like being famous," Maya said honestly. "She says SEALs are supposed to work in secret, and all the attention makes her job harder." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly at Maya's mature response. "That's a very thoughtful way to put it, Maya. Sometimes people who do important work don't want recognition. They just want to help." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the classroom door. Mrs. Garcia, the secretary, peered in with an apologetic expression. "Mrs. Chun, Maya has visitors in the principal's office." Maya felt a flutter of anxiety. Visits to the principal's office were rarely good news, even when you hadn't done anything wrong. Mrs. Chen walked her down the hallway, offering reassuring words that didn't quite calm Maya's nerves. But when they reached the main office, Maya's anxiety turned to surprise. Principal Martinez was there, along with 2 people in military uniforms whom Maya didn't recognize. And sitting in one of the visitor chairs, looking professional but slightly out of place in the elementary school setting, was her mother. Mom, Maya said, confused. What are you doing here? Elena stood and gave Maya a warm hug. Swefart. These are my colleagues, Commander Johnson and Lieutenant Foster. They wanted to meet you. Commander Johnson, a tall woman with graying hair and kind eyes, extended her hand to Maya for a formal handshake. Maya Rodriguez, it's an honor to meet you. Your mother has told us so much about you. Maya shook the commander's hand, remembering the lessons Elena had taught her about military courtesy. It's nice to meet you too, ma'am. Maya, Lieutenant Foster said, also shaking her hand, we wanted to personally thank you for something very important. Maya looked confused. Thank me? I didn't do anything special. Elena smiled at her daughter's response. Actually, sweetheart, you did something very special. When you stood up in class and told everyone about my job, even when they didn't believe you, you showed the kind of courage that we try to teach in the military. Commander Johnson nodded. Your mother's rescue of your school made national news, Maya. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about the role of women in the military and the importance of believing in people even when their stories seem impossible. We've had dozens of young women contact our recruiting offices, Lieutenant Foster added. They all mention the story of the little girl who never stopped believing in her SEAL mother. You've inspired people, Maya. Maya felt overwhelmed by this information. She had never thought of herself as inspiring anyone. She had just been trying to tell the truth about her mother. Maya, Elena said, sitting down so she was at her daughter's eye level. Commander Johnson has something she'd like to give you. The commander reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folded flag in a triangular wooden case. This is a flag that was flown over the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., she explained. It's being presented to you in recognition of your strength and your unwavering belief in your mother's service to our country. Maya accepted the flag case with reverent hands, understanding that this was something important even if she didn't fully grasp its significance. Thank you, she whispered. There's something else, Elena said, her voice warm with pride. Commander Johnson would like you to participate in a special ceremony at the Navy base next month. They're recognizing the rescue operation, and they want you to be part of it. Would you like that, Maya? Commander Johnson asked. You get to meet other military families and see some of the training facilities where your mother learned to be a SEAL. Maya looked at her mother, seeing encouragement and love in Elena's eyes. Why get to see where you trained? Elena loves it. Some of it, yes. The parts that aren't classified. After the visitors left and Maya returned to her classroom, she found it hard to concentrate on math worksheets and spelling words. The morning's events felt like something from a dream. Important adults thanking her for being brave, recognition from the Pentagon, an invitation to a military ceremony. At lunch, Maya sat with her usual group of friends, the flag case carefully placed beside her lunch tray. The other children gathered around to examine it, their voices filled with awe. The Pentagon is like the most important military building in the whole world, breathed Jessica Walsh. And they flew a flag there just for you. Maya touched the smooth wood of the flag case. I still don't really understand why, she admitted. I didn't do anything except tell the truth. But you kept telling the truth even when nobody believed you, Bobby Peterson pointed out. That takes guts. As Maya thought about Bobby's words, she began to understand what the adults had been trying to tell her. Courage wasn't just about rescuing people from floods or completing dangerous military missions. Sometimes courage was as simple as standing up for what you knew to be true, even when the whole world seemed to be laughing at you. After school, Maya walked home to find her mother in the kitchen, preparing dinner and humming quietly to herself. Elena looked relaxed and happy, dressed in civilian clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. It was easy to forget, seeing her like this, that she was one of the most elite warriors in the world. Mom, Maya said, setting the flag case carefully on the kitchen table. The kids at school keep asking me to tell them stories about your job. What am I allowed to say? Elena paused in her cooking and sat down beside Maya. You can tell them about the parts we've already talked about. My training, the fact that I serve on a SEAL team, and the rescue operation. But remember that most of what I do is classified, which means it has to stay secret to protect other people. I understand, Maya said. But can I ask you something? When you were training to be a SEAL, Did people doubt you the way my classmates doubted me? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. All the time, she said honestly. Some of my instructors didn't think I belonged there. Some of my teammates thought I would quit. Even some of my family members thought I was making a mistake. How did you handle it? The same way you did, sweetheart. I focused on proving myself through my actions, not my words. I showed up every day and did the work even when it was hard, even when people were watching me fail. Eventually, the doubters became believers. Maya nodded, understanding the parallel between her mother's experience and her own. And now nobody doubts you anymore. Elena smiled. Now they doubt me about different things. Being a SEAL was just the beginning, Maya. Life keeps giving us new challenges, new opportunities to prove ourselves. The important thing is to never stop believing in what you're capable of. That evening, as Maya did her homework at the kitchen table, she could hear her parents talking quietly in the living room. They were discussing Elena's next deployment, which would come in a few months. Maya had learned not to ask too many questions about these missions, but she no longer felt the same anxiety about her mother leaving. The storm had taught Maya something important about her mother's work. Elena wasn't just disappearing into danger for months at a time. She was out in the world being exactly the kind of person who showed up when others needed help most. Maya had seen firsthand what her mother was capable of, and that knowledge made the separations easier to bear. Later that night, as Elena tucked Maya into bed, Maya asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Mom, do you think I could be a SEAL someday?" Elena smiled and brushed Maya's hair away from her face. "You could be anything you want to be, sweetheart. You've already proven that you have the most important qualification." "What's that?" "The courage to stand up for what's right, even when nobody believes you. Everything else is just training." Maya fell asleep that night thinking about the future, about the flag that now sat on her dresser, about the ceremony she would attend, and the story she would hear from other military families. But mostly, she thought about her mother, somewhere out there in the world, proving every single day that heroes came in all forms, and that the most powerful truths were often the ones that seemed impossible to believe. The girl who had once stood alone in a classroom defending her mother's honor was no longer alone. She had become part of a larger story, a testament to the power of unwavering belief and the strength that came from knowing who you were, no matter what anyone else thought. And in Pine Ridge, Colorado, nobody would ever doubt Maya Rodriguez again.